This is the Mobile Philosopher Podcast. It's a lucky dip of strange distractions taken from the work of philosophers both living and dead. If you enjoy this, you'll probably also enjoy the Mobile Philosopher books, of which there are 3, and you can find more information at themobilephilosopher.com. Today's episode, Punishing the Unlucky. Imagine we both had murderous ambitions. You want to kill someone, and so do I. You select a bow and arrow as your weapon of choice, and you're a good shot. So you take your bow and arrow, and you load the arrow into the bow, and you aim carefully, and you shoot at your intended victim, and you hit them and kill them. I'm a good shot too. I take my bow and arrow, I aim it at my intended victim, and I shoot the arrow with expertise, intending to kill them. But a gust of wind comes along and blows my arrow off course, and I miss. Later, a judge finds you guilty of murder and you get life. In a separate trial, I am found guilty of attempted murder and receive a lesser sentence. Our legal system punishes murder much more severely than attempted murder. But is that justifiable? How can my action warrant a lesser sentence just because my victim got lucky? Many reformers argue that the punishments should be the same in both cases, and there's a very simple philosophical argument for that conclusion. The first premise of that argument is that we can only be held responsible for things which are within our control. Right? You can't be blamed for things that were outside of your control. Now, it's within your control and within my control to plan and try to kill somebody. But neither of us has got any power over the wind, right? In general, we've got no control over the various physical processes which help determine whether an attempt at murder is successful. So you and I can be held responsible for attempting murder, for trying to kill, but we can't be held responsible for the outcomes of those attempts, because they're outside of our control. We both equally tried to kill, and since trying to kill is the only thing that we can be held responsible for, it seems that we ought to receive the same punishment. The philosopher Judith Thomson said about this argument in 1987 that it smells too much of the study and too little of the open air. Isn't it just obvious that you've done something worse than me and therefore deserve a harsher penalty? Apparently, every jurisdiction in the world, or almost every jurisdiction in the world, would punish you more severely than me. I mean, I won't claim to be an expert in this. I've done a bit of Google research. Apparently, in almost every jurisdiction, murder gets a more harsh penalty than attempted murder. So isn't that good evidence of a very clear, natural intuition about justice? Isn't that intuition about justice clearer than any philosophical meddling, however clear and simple that meddling seems to be? I don't know, we've got a dilemma here, right? I mean, on the one hand, we've got a simple philosophical argument that seems to show that murder and attempted murder should be punished in the same way. On the other hand, we've got this near universal intuition that murder is worse than attempted murder. So what to do? I mean, you might worry a little bit about that intuition, that near universal intuition that murder is worse than attempted murder. You might worry that it's got an ignoble origin. And consider, if somebody makes a failed attempt to kill somebody that I love, I'm going to be a lot less angry than if they make a successful attempt. You know, if they make a successful attempt to kill somebody I love, I'm going to want vengeance. And if they make an unsuccessful attempt, I'm less enthusiastic about vengeance, probably. So the worry is that maybe our law is just reflecting that desire for revenge, in which case maybe it's not justifiable. Maybe we can't trust the intuition. Maybe we can't trust the smell of the open air, to use Thomson's phrase, and must retreat into the study after all. That won't necessarily lead to reform. In 1989, David Lewis gave a defence of our law. He gave an argument in favour of giving a less severe sentence for attempted murder, and his argument has got the unmistakable scent of the indoors. Lewis argued that in cases of murder and attempted murder, the state should run a penal lottery. As argued before, you and we can be blamed for what we can control, and we do have some control over how likely it is that someone will die. By firing my arrow, I make it, let's suppose, 80% likely that my victim will die. I can't make it 100% sure that my victim will die because of things like the wind. But it is within my control to raise their chances of death to 80%. It's reasonable, therefore, isn't it, that the state should make it equally likely, should make it 80% likely that I receive a life sentence. Fair's fair. But how would such a lottery work in practice, right? Suppose I fire this arrow and we all know, don't we, that significantly raises the chances that somebody will die. Let's suppose the wind comes along and blows it off course. And so I've made it very likely that the person will die, but they haven't died, and the court then asks itself, okay, well, let's make it equally likely that you go to jail for life. Well, how likely is that? I made it likely that my victim would die, and the court has to make it equally likely that I get a life sentence. But how does the court calculate how likely it was that my intended victim would die? How does it do that calculation? Does the court flip a coin and give me a 50-50 chance of life? Does the court roll a die and give me life if it rolls a 1? What sort of odds is the court going to give me? According to Lewis, the simplest and fairest solution to this problem is for the court to simply use my attempt at murder as the lottery, to use that attempt as the lottery itself. So here's how this works. I lose that lottery and get life in prison if my intended victim dies. So when I shoot the arrow, I've started the lottery, right? If the victim dies, I get life in prison. If the victim doesn't die, I don't get life in prison. And in that way, the court ensures that my chance of getting life is equal to the chance my victim had of dying. Of course, I was lucky enough to win this lottery because my victim didn't die. You lost the lottery because your victim died and you get life in prison. The court, of course, still disapproved of my making the attempt at killing, and therefore gives me a small punishment anyway, not as bad as your punishment, but a small one anyway, and, that helps deter others from attempting murder as well as giving the court an opportunity to express its disapproval. So, your successful attempt at murder gets punished more severely than my unsuccessful attempt. And that, of course, is the system that we have. So Lewis justifies our system as an example of a penal lottery. Is that fair? Does that make sense? You made it likely that somebody would die, and the state makes it equally likely that you will have life in prison. Is that fair? Lewis says that when a judge incarcerates somebody, that's a lottery. Everybody has a really terrible time in jail, of course, but some people have a much more traumatic time than others, and that's largely a matter of luck. When a judge sentences someone to prison, they significantly raise the likelihood that they will have great trauma, but they don't guarantee that they will. So that's a kind of lottery. And if that's fair, isn't Lewis's lottery also fair? I don't know. If you enjoy these podcasts, I hope you'll also enjoy the Mobile Philosopher books. Like I said at the beginning, there are 3 of them. They are available in the usual places, available in bookshops, available online, and you can get more information at themobilephilosopher.com. Thanks for listening.